Welcome back, everybody, to Shifty's 49ers Talk. In today's video, I'm going to give you guys my Week 2 NFL predictions. Last week, Week 1, we went 10-6, which I thought was pretty good, all things considered. Week 1 results notoriously really wacky, super hard to predict. So overall, I got to be fairly satisfied with that result. Looking to do better, though, in Week 2. And here, guys, before we get into the video, let's run the intro. Kicking off Week 2 in the NFL, and on Thursday Night Football, we have the Buffalo Bills visiting the Miami Dolphins in a big-time AFC East showdown early in the season. When you look at Week 1, both teams struggled in the first half, but found their form in the second half. Josh Allen was super impressive. Tua able to find the big plays to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. When I look at this matchup, you have the defensive head coach of the Bills, Sean McDermott, offensive mastermind Mike McDaniel. Overall, though, this should be a really close game. The line is Miami by 2.5. Normally, home teams given 3 points, so I think it's a slight potential favorite that Buffalo are the better team, let's say. And I think that in this early matchup on a short week, I am going to go with the Buffalo Bills here. I'm going to side with Josh Allen. He's just able to make so many plays off script. I think he's going to be a little bit more comfortable with some of his weapons. Keon Coleman looked good. I think with Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Curtis Samuel's probably going to get more involved. They had a good running game Week 1. Miami, though, is going to have a couple, I think, of big explosive plays, although Buffalo did a good job of limiting that against the Cardinals. I like Buffalo a little bit more, and that's simply because I like Josh Allen a lot more than Tua Tagovailoa, but it should be a thriller of a matchup early in the season. You'll love to see it. Now moving on to the next matchup, and we have the New Orleans Saints visiting the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys favored by 6 in this one. Cowboys dominated the Browns Week 1. The Saints just obliterated the Carolina Panthers. I do think this Saints team is better than we maybe gave it credit for heading into the season. I think Derek Carr is in an offense that really suits his skills. However, I believe that Dallas is just going to have too much firepower, and I expect a big-time game from CeeDee Lamb. Although the Saints are going to try and match up Marshawn Lattimore to shut down CeeDee Lamb just lines up everywhere. We saw him have multiple runs against the Browns and pretty successful at that. I think that the Cowboys continue to get creative offensively. Micah Parsons, Trayvon Diggs, Ron Bland, these guys are going to make plays defensively. It's going to be a lot more difficult for Derek Carr and the Saints offense to move against this really good Cowboys defense. I think the Cowboys just a little bit too much firepower, although this game is going to be a lot closer than I would have thought if you asked me about this game a couple of weeks ago. Now we're going to move on to a big time matchup in the NFC. Tampa Bay Buccaneers visit the Detroit Lions, a rematch of the NFC divisional game from last year. Tampa Bay destroyed the Washington Commanders. You know, as you'd expect, the Lions just got by the LA Rams, and the Rams had a ton of injuries. Now look, the Lions are at home. They're going to be favored in this game by 7.5. I think that's a little bit too generous. I think that Tampa Bay is going to be out for revenge. Baker Mayfield will look really good in another year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. This should be a really interesting matchup. Overall, though, I am going to lean with the Detroit Lions winning this game, but I do think it will be closer than a lot of people expected, and I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I have them in my top 10 in the power rankings. They are a good football team, and you cannot overlook them. Moving on to the Colts and the Packers. The Colts are favored by 2.5. We know that Jordan Love is going to be out for this game. Unfortunately, he got hurt. He's going to miss a few games. You look at the Indianapolis Colts, though, they had a really close game with division rivals Houston in Week 1. Anthony Richardson had just a crazy stat line. It was like 9 completions out of 19 attempts, 200 plus yards, just massive touchdowns. And that's really what I think the Colts are going to be. Just absolute splash plays. However, what they're going to want to do and need to do is try to establish the run game. Last week, the Packers gave up 3 touchdowns to the Philadelphia Eagles' Saquon Barkley. I think the Colts are just going to try and just beat down the Green Bay Packers, just wear them down throughout the game with Jonathan Taylor, and eventually I do think the Colts will win this game. Malik Willis likely starting for the Green Bay Packers. Hasn't been with the Packers very long in a complex system. They'll keep things pretty simple. I do think the Colts should be able to slow down the Green Bay offense, although if Josh Jacobs can get something going, you never know what could happen, but I do think Indianapolis comes away with the win here. Now we move on to the New York Jets taking on the Tennessee Titans. The Jets got beat badly by the 49ers, a little bit worse than a lot of people expected. The Tennessee Titans, Will Levis had a complete meltdown. They were in control of that game against Chicago. Then you have an interception return on just a really bad play by Levis, a special teams return by Chicago. I just don't know what to make of this Titans team. I think they have really talented players on both sides of the ball. I'm don't know what to make of it. I'm going to lean here with the New York Jets just because I trust Aaron Rodgers a lot more than I do Will Levis. I think the Jets had a really tough matchup week 1 going to San Francisco. Going to Tennessee, a little bit easier. Not the easiest matchup, but I do think the Jets are able to pull out a close game in this one. Then we move on to a really interesting game. And of course, because it's going to involve the 49ers. The 49ers traveling to Minnesota to taking on the Vikings, who just beat down on the New York Giants. The Giants, who I do not think are a good football team, but still credit to Sam Darnold for having an amazing week 1 game. Brian Flores is a really good defensive coordinator. The 49ers are favored by 5.5 points, and I do think that's justified when you just look at this 49ers team on paper. One thing to keep in mind though, San Francisco has not won in Minnesota for 32 years. I certainly hope this is the year that they change that. Jordan Mason had a breakout game. Brock Purdy looked really good. The defense was flying around, multiple turnovers. Fred Warner is just the best linebacker in the league, and I'm not sure that it's close. I do think it's going to be a really tough-fought game. Brian Flores did a good job last year scheming against Kyle Shanahan's offense. Minnesota did get a couple of really lucky plays, though, in that game against San Francisco last season. I do think the 49ers come away with the win, but similar to the Saints-Cowboys game, if you asked me about this matchup a couple of weeks ago, I'd have thought the Niners by 14. I think maybe this is 24-20 or something like that, San Francisco. Now let's move on to the Seahawks against the Patriots. The Seahawks are favored on the road by 3.5 points, and I'm going to go with Seattle in this game. Seattle really got their offense rolling in the second half against Denver. They were able to establish the run game with Kenneth Walker, who I thought looked really good once they got him going. Seattle does have major question marks on the offensive line. Maybe Gerard Mayo and that defensive coaching staff will be able to exploit it. I do like the New England Patriots secondary. However, I just love Seattle's defense. They shut down, made Bo Nix look really, really, really bad. I'm a big fan of Mike McDonald as a defensive coach. And I do think there are weapons there. I mean, there's Lockett, Smith and Jigba, and you got DK Metcalf, but I really like the run game for Seattle, and I think they're going to control the possession, get the crowd out of it, and I think Seattle gets the win in New England. Now we move on to just a terrible game, and it's the New York Giants at the Washington Commanders. Jaden Daniels, as much of a runner as he is a passer, in the first game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Giants were just awful in every way imaginable. The Washington Commanders only favored by 1.5 here. I'm going to go with Washington in this game. I think Jaden Daniels maybe gets to air out the ball a little bit more. I expect to see a little bit more of Terry McLaurin. That run game with Robinson is pretty solid, but I like Daniels to maybe have a breakout game throwing the football. The Giants, I don't really have much positive things to say, but what they need to do is they need to get Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau into the backfield and after the quarterback. Jaden Daniels, still a rookie, going to be only in his second game in his NFL career. If you can frazzle him, if you can make him a little bit nervous in the pocket, he's prone to possibly making some mistakes. And then Daniel Jones, he's a nightmare. I don't know what to think of this Giants offense. I'm going to go with Washington in this one, but this could be a really ugly game. And speaking of pretty ugly games, we have the LA Chargers going to the Carolina Panthers. The Chargers favored by 6 on the road, and I think that's absolutely fair. The Jim Harbaugh era started off at home with a win against the Raiders. Dave Canales' era started off with a bad loss on the road against the Saints. I just like the Chargers here. Justin Herbert is a very good quarterback. It's going to take him time to get used to his weapons. Ladd McConkey seems like a really good draft pick, but it's the run game. J.K. Dobbins just had a breakout game. He looked really good against the Raiders, and I think that is going to continue. Also, the Chargers defense is just filled with playmakers. You look at Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Derwin James. I think they're going to make life really difficult for Bryce Young, and I expect a few more turnovers by Bryce Young in this game. Chargers probably by at least 10, I would say. Now we move on to the Cleveland Browns against the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is a game where both teams, I think, have pretty high expectations, especially heading into the season. Cleveland lost badly to Dallas. Jacksonville loses a heartbreaker to Miami. And I think that I'm going to go with the Jaguars in this one. I do not like what I see from Deshaun Watson and that Browns offense at all. Credit Dallas's defense in that game, but they just couldn't move the ball at all. And I think the final scoreline in the Browns-Dallas Cowboys game was actually really generous to Cleveland. You look at Jacksonville, really good first half, then they kind of fell apart. I think they get maybe a little bit more consistency. It's going to be the home opener. Brian Thomas, really good pick so far. I like Travis Etienne. They'll get their other weapons involved like Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, so I do think Jacksonville bounces back, they get a win, and suddenly Cleveland Brown is going to be in a hole at 0-2. Now we're going to move on to the Las Vegas Raiders traveling to the Baltimore Ravens, and this might be the easiest game to pick this week, and now that I've said that, I think the Raiders are going to win. No, I'm going to stick with my pick. The Ravens will win, but the Ravens are favored by 9 points. Look, they had a really tough matchup week 1 opening night in Kansas City. Lamar Jackson did everything that he could. The defense for Baltimore is still really solid, still a lot of good players all over the field. I think this Baltimore team is just way too much for Gardner Minshew and the Raiders on the road in Baltimore, home opener. I think Baltimore wins by 2 touchdowns. Let's now move on to an NFC West showdown. We have the LA Rams traveling to the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals favored by 1 in this game. So I think Vegas is kind of saying they do actually like the Rams, considering, again, the home teams normally get 3 points. And I'm actually going to go with the Arizona Cardinals. You know, look, they had a really good first half against Buffalo. They were able to run the ball effectively. The problem is that they couldn't make any explosive plays happen. And maybe they are able to rectify that, especially they need to throw the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. I know fantasy owners were crying, and I'm a Marvin Harrison Jr. fantasy owner, and I was crying because he had 1 catch for 4 yards, but I do think they make much more of an effort to stretch the field a little bit, challenge the defense vertically as well as horizontally, but also have that effective, consistent run game with James Conner. And then you have Kyler Murray running around. It's a pretty difficult offense to defend if they can get that vertical game going, which I think they're going to try and do more in week 2. The LA Rams, they are just flooded with injuries. There's injuries all over the place on offense. Puka Nacua is out. They're missing like 3 offensive linemen, a couple of defensive backs. So just because of all the injuries, I'm going to go with the Arizona Cardinals in this matchup. Then we look at the Pittsburgh Steelers traveling to Denver to take on the Broncos, and I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers in this one. You look at the defense, they absolutely shut down, made Kirk Cousins look really, really bad, and I think they're going to do the same thing to Bo Nix and that offense. Pittsburgh, TJ Watt is maybe already making a serious case to being the defensive player of the year. The offense, Justin Fields, they did just enough to get the win in Atlanta, 6 field goals. They, of course, need to start scoring a lot more touchdowns, which I think they might do. You know, Justin Fields wasn't really expected to be the starter until, maybe hours or even maybe a day at most before the game. So now he has the full week of practice. I think the offense will look a little bit better. They're able to put up a few more points, and Pittsburgh gets the win against a pretty bad Denver Broncos team. Now we move on to what I would have considered probably the marquee matchup of the week, which is the Cincinnati Bengals traveling to the Kansas City Chiefs. But the Bengals just lost so bad week 1. They looked awful. Joe Burrow and the offense couldn't get anything going, and they lose to the New England Patriots, who I don't think really anybody expected. Then you look at Kansas City, and they beat what might have been their hardest game on the schedule, outside of maybe on the road in San Francisco. But I think beating Baltimore, that's going to give them so much confidence. Xavier Worthy was making big-time plays. Rashee Rice looks really good. Travis Kelce doing Travis Kelce things. And Pacheco, an effective runner. This Chiefs offense, super hard to slow down. You have Steve Spagnuolo doing a really great job calling plays here. So I do think the Chiefs get the win here. Maybe a little bit closer than people expect, because I think that we expect the Chiefs to blow out the Bengals considering what happened week 1, but Joe Burrow just seems to play his best football against the best teams. We saw it last year against San Francisco. I think he has a winning record against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, so I do think that the Chiefs will win, but I think it's going to be pretty close. Now we move on to the Sunday night football game, and it is the Chicago Bears at the Houston Texans. A few years ago, this would have been maybe the worst matchup of the season. Now you look at it, and it's actually really intriguing. Caleb Williams struggled a lot week 1, absolutely no doubt about it. And I think he's going to struggle against this Houston Texans defense. And it was really the special teams and the defense that saved the day for Chicago. But this is a whole other beast. Caleb Williams' first NFL game on the road in Houston against a damn good Texans team. CJ Stroud able to throw the ball. Joe Mixon, what a great addition. He's been, because the Texans do such a great job stretching the field, it just opens up everything underneath, and Joe Mixon consistently able to get 6-7 yards a carry, and he was just dominant. Then you look at the defense, and they are able to get after the quarterback, and they're going to force some mistakes of Caleb Williams. You know, you look at Will Anderson, you look at Danielle Hunter, and then in the secondary, Derek Stingley, Jimmy Ward, those guys will be able to make plays on the ball. I do think that Houston wins this game, and fairly convincingly, maybe by 10 plus points. And to round off week 2, we have the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. The Falcons looked a lot worse than I expected. Kirk Cousins, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, all these weapons, and you have a very competent quarterback in Kirk Cousins, and they just couldn't do anything offensively. Let's give them some credit though. Defensively, they didn't give up a touchdown week 1. They gave up a whole bunch of field goals, but overall they didn't let the Steelers into the end zone. So that is maybe one saving grace that the Falcons have to look at. But I just think that Philadelphia is going to be way too much. You know, they're a completely different beast offensively compared to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I do think the Eagles are going to be able to score some points. Jalen Hurts throwing the football, to A.J. Brown and, Devontae Smith and all the Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley running the football. I think Philadelphia wins this game fairly easily. I'm going to say maybe by 10 points. But Philadelphia looking good for another week in a row against another relatively tough matchup in the Atlanta Falcons. But there you have it, guys. Those are my week 2 predictions. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Feel free to drop your predictions as well, and we can discuss that. But there you have it. 10-6 last week. We're hoping to do a little bit better this week. I'm going to catch you guys at the stream on Sunday, 49ers Vikings. But before I peace on out of here, I'm going to say 2 things. And that is the butt counts. Catch you guys on the flip side.